Oceanigan. Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Culp, and I am an education and program specialist at the Gilcrease Museum, and I work in the Learning and Community Engagement Department. And today I am so excited to be doing this Facebook Live because I'm getting to interview one of the foremost Cherokee beadwork artists. I am a member of the Cherokee Nation, and I did start to dabble in beadwork, and so it's an amazing opportunity to get to talk to our guest today. So I want to welcome Martha Berry. Martha is a Cherokee beadwork artist who creates beaded art that's inspired by traditional Southeastern Woodland Native American Indian beadwork. Now, Martha was awarded the Tradition Bearer Award by the Cherokee National Historical Society at the Seven Star Gala, which was held in Tulsa on September 26th in 2015. And in March 2018, she was a featured artist on OCO TV, Voices of the Cherokee People, in a segment called Martha Berry, Leading a Beadwork Revival. So Martha, it is so good to have you here today.
Ocio, oh, Danielle, it's my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure. I grew up going to Gilcrease as a child and have loved it and been in awe there many times and learned a lot. And this is just a huge honor for me. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being here. And today we are going to delve into all things Cherokee beadwork. But the first thing that I really want to talk to you about is an immense honor that you have. So for those of you that don't know, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma selects artists every year and gives them a title and an honor to recognize all the hard work they do, recognizing really preserving our culture, and they get named a Cherokee National Treasure. And Martha, you were actually named a Cherokee National Treasure on August 27, 2013. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the process that went into selecting you as a National Treasure and, what that means to you?
Sure. Oh, it is an honor. It's the greatest honor that I will ever achieve, and I'm still amazed. I'm still amazed. In fact, I remember when Bill John Baker was chief at the time, when he called me to tell me I'd been selected. I made him tell me twice. I couldn't believe it. It is there are only about 100. I don't know the exact number, but there are only about 100 Cherokee National Treasures, and the since I think it was the mid 80s that it began. And so there's 350,000 roughly Cherokees or more now, and only 100 have been selected. So it is a really great honor. And the requirements are very simple. You have to be practicing some sort of Cherokee traditional art, or representing it in your work, so that you are teaching Cherokee culture. You have to have been doing it for 10 years. You have to be a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And then you have to submit a piece of your work to the committee, actually physically submit it, so that they can examine it. And so it doesn't sound all that complicated, but it's a little bit, it's very rigorous in terms of how few are selected. And in my particular case, the first time I was nominated was in the year 2000. And in the next 13 years, I was nominated 4 times, each time with multiple letters of recommendation and all that kind of thing, and wasn't selected then until 2013. So it was kind of a long time coming for me. For others, it's not so much, I think, but it just depends. But for me, I was the first one for beadwork. So that was a big deal to include beadwork as one of the art forms. And the other thing is, I was the first one that does not live in the Cherokee Nation or even in the state of Oklahoma. So for them to select an outlander like me, it was kind of a big deal. So that's another reason I think it took so long for me.
Yeah, and the National Treasures are, really just an asset to our tribe because, as Cherokee people, we don't just think about ourselves today, but, we remember 7 generations behind us, and we also remember 7 generations into the future. And not necessarily remember them, but we look towards that. And your work is so important for that because, Cherokee beadwork really needed a revival. And one amazing thing that you can actually see where you get to see the national treasures is, like Martha was talking about, you may be nominated and it may take a while to actually be selected. The Cherokee Nation actually selects 3 national treasures every year, and they are announced at our holiday celebration, which is always Labor Day weekend, and that's when we celebrate the signing of our Cherokee Constitution. But a project that the Cherokee Nation worked on and published a couple of years ago is the National Treasure Book. So up until the point it was published, they did these spreads of all of the artists that were national treasures, and you get to see what all they do, whether they're basket makers, or they're beadwork artists, or they're being recognized for their efforts in language or traditional practices like making bows and blowguns. So it was really an amazing book. Martha, do you want to talk to us at all about your spread and what that looked like, and what it's like to kind of be immortalized in that format?
Well, it's a spectacularly beautiful book. It was beautifully put together. It took a great deal of work. Every artist was interviewed and wrote a piece, kind of in their own words. So there's a real variety of writing in it. And then we were also interviewed. When I was up there, on a trip up there for something else, I was interviewed for really quite a while. It was a good half hour, 45-minute interview on my experience, so that is on record too. But the book itself is spectacularly beautiful, and every artist has a double page, and with lots of beautiful photography, and it's basically a coffee table book, but it's just jam-packed with history in all of the art forms. And some are, pre-contact, some are post-contact, and all are genuine, bona fide Cherokee tradition. And I just made it in the book because it came out just shortly after I was made a national treasure. So it was a thrill to get beadwork. And my whole being, I call it my empty nest baby, because I started this as a part-time job 5 days a week when my eldest daughter went away to college. So beadwork is my empty nest baby. And I'm all about making people aware of Cherokee beadwork, that it existed and what it looked like, because it was such a lost art form when I began working on it that, it's very generous to say that 5% of Cherokees would have known their own grandmother's beadwork if you laid it out in front of them. There were, to give you, well, I'm getting away from the book, but to give you some idea of how why this is so important to me. There were, in the year 2000, there were about a dozen people on planet Earth who had mastered traditional Cherokee and Southeastern beadwork. And of that dozen, only half of us, 6, were descendants of the tribe. The others were reenactors and scholars. And of those 6, there were only a couple of Cherokees. And in that same year, the year 2000, there were 250,000 federally recognized registered tribal citizens of the Cherokee Nation, and only 2 had mastered the beadwork. So it was important that people learn it. So every time I get to do something like this, or I get in the book, the Treasures book, it's important because it's an opportunity for people to see beadwork.
Well, that really leads us into the next question that I wanted to ask you, because, there were so few people, and, I grew up in Cherokee Nation. I grew up doing programs, being exposed to culture, being exposed to language, and, beadwork is one of those things that was missing. And I think sometimes there's like a misconception that, Cherokees didn't do beadwork, or if we did beadwork, it was like something that we adopted another style from a different tribe. And I think, when I started to get interested in beadwork and started, to look up things and do research, and I came across your name, I really think that, especially beadwork within Cherokee Nation, I really want to credit you with the revival of that and really like breathing life back into that, because we see things that aren't necessarily lost or dead, but sometimes they're just put down for a while. And then, you know, someone's walking along the path and they see it and they pick it up and they really revive it for our people. And I really think that that's what you did for us in beadwork. So I would love if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what that revival looked like, the research that you had to do because there were so few people. You know, where do you start? Where do you start researching? Where do you get that kind of information?
Well, I love that, walking down the path. I like that. That's a really good way to say it.
Yeah, I heard
Um,
a scholar say
re-
that at a conference once. He was
there's a
talking about
reason,
that.
there's a reason why our beadwork was so lost, and that is that we began creating beadwork because we had contact with Europeans long before the Plains tribes did. I mean, a lot of everyday contact.
Hmm.
Uh, so we began to incorporate European items into our everyday life. And that was back beginning of, like 1715 or so, just in the early 1700s. And so our beadwork traditions began to really mature, and the materials we were used to trading for by about the time of the American Revolution, about the 1770s. And then it began to continue to evolve and mature so that the golden classic era of Cherokee and Southeastern beadwork from about 1800 until the removal, which began in the 1830s, was over by 1840. And basically, the removal was a brick wall.
Hmm.
For those of us who don't know, the Indian removal is the Trail of Tears. So the Indian removal just killed a lot of our traditions for many reasons, and it certainly almost killed beadwork because we lost our trading partners. We were incredibly poor when we finally arrived in the West, and we didn't have time to devote the time to beadwork. And I think we lost the brain trust because I think a lot of the beadwork is done by older women, and we know that the older population took a much bigger hit on the Trail of Tears. So basically, our beadwork ceased being produced by about 1840. Well, then Plains beadwork began to be produced prolifically after the Civil War during the reservation period. And so at that time, Native Americans were the vanishing race. And the great painters and photographers came out from back east, and they took lots of photographs and they did a lot of paintings of Native Americans. And they were all wearing Plains regalia because they were Plains people.
Hmm.
But these images were so widely circulated all over the world that even if you had been a Native American, which was true to some of the people around the Great Lakes area and the Niagara Falls area, people had been selling their tribe's beadwork to tourists for generations,
Hmm.
had to begin creating Plains beadwork because if it wasn't Plains beadwork, people didn't think it was Native American.
That's
They
what sold.
didn't think it was authentic.
Yeah.
And so, because we stopped producing it so long ago, nobody remembered seeing grandma over in the corner beading. And because of this prolific abundance of Plains beadwork images, that's what everybody thought was done. And I must say, I love Plains beadwork. I started out doing it because there wasn't anybody teaching Cherokee
Mhm.
beadwork. And so that's how I learned. But I kept studying history and running across a photograph of an artifact of a Cherokee or Southeastern beaded artifact, or a painting, a portrait of a Southeastern tribal official wearing or carrying beadwork, and none of it looked like any of the stuff I was making.
Mhm.
And so that's what made me move forward and say, I want to know what my ancestors made. I
Yeah.
want to do what they did. That's been the hope from the beginning. I don't want to copy what they made. I want to do what they did,
Yeah.
and that's what they.
Yeah. So, can you talk to us a little bit about like the immense amount of research you had to do?
Well, I
And
didn't
that's probably hard to do like in a short
know
amount of time.
because I don't even have a college degree. I mean, I until this, the library was the last place I ever wanted to be. But I just wanted to do what my grandmothers had done. I didn't start out to do anything special. I just wanted to get to know my grandma, who was dead when I was born. I didn't know any of my female Cherokee ancestors, and I just had this longing to know. what they were like. And so I thought, well, maybe I could connect some way if I did something that they did. And since all Native American women did beadwork, of course, that's not true, but that's that image that you get. I thought, well, I'll learn how to, because I knew how to use a needle and thread. I knew how to embroider. I knew I had those, and so I started out, and so I went down to the hobby shop and I got a stack of how-to books this tall, and a bunch of awful supplies, all of which were wrong. But that was what was at the hobby shop, and I came home and I started making mistakes and trying to learn what was in the craft books, all of which was plain beadwork. And so fortunately, I did not stop also studying Cherokee history. And occasionally I would run across a photograph of an artifact, a Cherokee or Southeastern beaded artifact, or like I said, or a chief or whatever, a painting of them wearing it. And I realized this is nothing like these how-to books. Mm-hmm. And so I kept doing research, and the only thing I had, there were no books, there were no teachers. The only thing I had were photographs. Mm-hmm. So I started collecting photographs. And my mom used to make me clothes because I'd clip out a magazine ad, and she'd make clothes from the ad. Yeah. Figure out a way to do that. And so I had stylish clothes before the patterns ever came out. And so, because she made my clothes. And so making something from a photograph was not foreign to me at all. But I just couldn't get a hold of photographs. Mm-hmm. So finally, I summoned all my courage, all of my I don't have a college degree courage, and wrote the curators of all the big name museums back east and said, could you please, told them what I was trying to do, and said, could you please send me photographs of Cherokee or Southeastern Woodlands beadwork, or photographs of Cherokees wearing beadwork. Mm-hmm. And I got a lot of responses. I didn't think I'd ever hear from anybody. I got wonderful responses back, and all of the photographs of artifacts were the pre-removal style of work. All of them, every single one. Any photographs of Cherokees wearing beadwork were post 1922, and in all of them, they were wearing plains beadwork, and every one. And I just thought, it just finished. What happened? Where did it go? It just disappeared. And so I was hooked. Then I had to find it and I had to learn it. And then I thought, well, I have to teach it. I mean, it isn't just enough that I know this. And so, one foot in front of the other. And by the way, in those responses from curators came an invitation to the Smithsonian for a grant to come for 3 weeks to Washington, D.C., and to examine their collection and study their provenance. And oh my God, you can actually see in my work where I went to Washington. You can see it. And I learned so much. I just learned so much, and it continued. I learn to this day. I learn from every piece I do. I have so much to learn.
And I think that's a really cool aspect of the time that we're moving into as, really listening and valuing the fact that we're all different people. We all have different values. And one thing that I've really noticed in cultural institutions, like the Smithsonian, also the museum in Minnesota that has a lot of Cherokee baskets and textiles, and the Gilcrease, is these cultural institutions are really opening their doors and encouraging Native American people to come in, and recognizing that even though that the objects are cared for at these institutions, like intrinsically, they really belong to the people. And so it's been really amazing seeing these cultural institutions opening up their doors. And it really makes a way for people like you, Martha, to research and to make sure that those traditions are never lost.
Well, yes. And two things about that. One is, everybody learns, and you can't wait till you know everything to do something. You have to just start with what you know and start doing and making mistakes and learning more. And some of the old curators made mistakes. I mean, there was, they misidentified things, and they didn't understand the importance of this and that, and they didn't have the opportunity and the materials and the technology to preserve things like we have now. So yeah, sometimes they made a mistake, and they misinterpreted, like you say, certain things because they didn't take into account the Native American way of thinking. And but I am so grateful that they had those things and that they kept those things because we didn't. I mean, if it wasn't for museums, we wouldn't know any of this. And so I am eternally grateful. And those letters, writing those letters and getting those responses forever cured my fear of curators. I love curators. They're the greatest people. They have a hard job and they do a good job and they take it very seriously. And also conservators, they take it very seriously. And I am so grateful for that because we would just be, I mean, I don't know that this particular art form would not have been completely lost forever were it not for dedicated museum employees over the generations that took care of that.
And so we've talked a little bit about, visiting cultural institutions and what your research looks like. Just so you can let our viewers know, especially ones that aren't very familiar with the fact that Cherokees have, done beadwork. Can you talk about the items that you would see, whether it was in cultural institutions or in photographs? Like, what were Cherokees beading?
Well, the most common objects and the ones that I create the most are bandolier bags, ceremonial sashes, moccasins, belts, and purses. And the bandolier bags were bling. They were the ones that were elaborately beaded were really not for utility purposes. They were bling, and it was sort of a show of wealth. And they loved bold colors. They loved bold designs. They loved elaborate designs. And a bandolier bag had a long strap that rested on one shoulder and ran across the chest and across the back. And then the pouch rested on the opposite hip. So you'd have the right shoulder, and then the pouch would have been on the left hip. And because it goes across your chest and across your back, that's why it's called bandolier. Anything you wear like that is referred to as a bandolier. And in them, they carried, well, we don't know what all they put in them. We know what European chroniclers saw them taking out. And so we know they carried personal smoking supplies, the little small pipes, that you see, the clay pipes, and tobacco, and ceremonial tobacco too. And we know that they carried objects that would have been kind of part of their identity. It could have been a rock. It could have been the gallbladder of a certain kind of bird. It could have been like you might think of someone carrying a rabbit's foot.
Yeah.
It was something that it was medicine, personal medicine, brought them power and made them feel strong. It was part of their identity. Those things we know. What else they may or may not have had in them, we don't know. But that's what the bandolier bags were. The ceremonial sashes were basically made like the strap of a bandolier bag, except it didn't have a lot of wiggly tassels and fringe and things at the bottom. It usually had a rounded edge. And those were very, almost mysterious. I'm fascinated and ever will be intrigued by ceremonial sashes. Whereas every other piece of Southeastern beadwork uses bold color of beads and all kinds of designs. The ceremonial sashes only used white beads. Every single pre-removal ceremonial sash I've ever seen has one specific design. They have some other designs, but they have one design on every single one. So we know that it was important. We know that it had meaning. And the techniques used on ceremonial sashes are different. So the materials, the construction, the designs, and the techniques are all completely different from any other piece of beadwork. Moccasins were what they call soft-soled center seamed. If you're familiar with plains moccasins, they generally have a hard leather sole that's just the shape at the bottom of the foot. And then the top, which is attached later, is beaded and then sewn onto the sole. So 2 pieces. But ours are made of 1 piece of leather. So you'd stand on a piece of leather and they measure around your foot and then cut it out. And then they would bring the leather up so that there was a center seam on the toe and a center seam up the back of the heel. So they're soft-soled because it's 1 piece of leather that's soft and it has a center seam at the front. So that's soft-soled center seam moccasins. And they were beaded, sometimes beaded directly on the leather, and sometimes the beadwork was sewn on to something else, and then that was sewn onto the leather. The belts were basically sashes, but they were just went around your waist. But they always had these long, finger woven, what they call drops or ties. They're long, like 3 or 4 feet, that hung down anywhere from 4 to 7 on each end of the belt, was tied. And then when the person wearing the belt sat down, they draped those long ties across their lap so they wouldn't drag on the ground. And then purses, the small ladies' purses, were almost without exception, teardrop shaped. And then there's a lot of variants from that. They generally had fringe. They generally had a little flap across the top, and very sort of dainty and delicate. But those are the main pieces.
So I do want to start talking about the items that you make that are absolutely phenomenal and gorgeous. If you ever get the opportunity to see Martha's work, if it's ever being shown somewhere, if it's at one of the art shows she enters or in an exhibition, please, because the attention to detail, and we're going to talk a little bit later about, what does go into it. We'll talk about the technique and the time and all that. But I do want to take the opportunity to show some images of the work that you've allowed us to show today. And first of all, I want to talk about the piece that was actually just donated to our collection. So, working at the Gilcrease is an amazing opportunity for me because I get to be surrounded by all of these beautiful pieces of Native American artwork. And so I was very excited when we actually got to acquire one of your pieces. So would you mind telling us a little bit about the bag that we have, Freedom of Movement?
I would be honored to, and I also want to thank the donors. And I don't know if they want to be named on air, but I'm very grateful to the donors. The bag was purchased with the intention of donating it to Gilcrease, so they're very generous, and I appreciate it very much. It's called bandolier bag is called Freedom of Movement, and it honors the Cherokee ceremonies that were oppressed for decades, to the point that they were down to only 5 ceremonial fires in Oklahoma. They had to be done in secret. They couldn't be the ceremonies that we had done forever. They had to hide to do them. And fortunately, that is no longer the case. It's opened up now. But they're very different from, if you think of like people dancing at a powwow. Cherokee ceremonials are very much more different. They are not loud. They are not bright. They are quiet, introspective times to realize again who you are and who everybody else is, and in relation to the Creator. So this particular bandolier bag is quite a bit less elaborate and sparkly than what I usually make, and that is the reason. It is to honor all of those who kept our traditions alive, even when they were being persecuted. And so it's simple designs. The designs on the strap is actually the sort of double S curve is design that we see on so many ceremonial sashes, which is not usually used on a bandolier bag, but I borrowed it because I wanted to tell the story. And then the design in the center of the flap of the bag is an equilateral cross, which represents the sun. It represents fire. It certainly represents ceremonial fire. And so the symbolism of the bag is very important. And again, I'm just delighted. I'm honored that Gilcrease not only has a piece of my work now, but that it is a piece that is, of all the work I've ever done, really honors Cherokee tradition more than any other. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's a big. You guys are a big deal.
We are very excited to have that in our collection. And, I want to really showcase another bandolier bag that you've made for us to show today, and it lends itself a little bit more to what you talked about earlier, that bandolier bags were flashy and very colorful. So can you tell us a little bit about your bandolier bag hidden in plain sight?
Excuse me. Yes, I'd be delighted to. Yeah, this one is much more typical of my work. First of all, it has a fully beaded flap, which adds probably 50 hours of work to it, and uh, is just a little bit more contemporary. Although there were some, I tried it on my work. We could talk. I know we're talking about this later, but I try to do traditional materials and traditional techniques in all of my work. And there are some artifacts that have fully beaded flaps. So that is actually traditional, but it's also has sort of a more contemporary look too. But anyway, it is this bag has hidden in the designs some of the old iconography that we find in objects found in the mounds in the Southeast, because the mound builder, the Mississippian people of the Southeast, are the ancestors of the Cherokee Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole. And so I often use pre-contact mound builder designs, and they are hidden all through this bag. See the S curve on the strap around the floral images. You see the equilateral cross within the floral images. You see in the center of the flap, you see 7 of the little double S curves coming out as petals of a flower, essentially. And the reason I did this is I was inspired to create this bag after I found a quote, an old quote in an old book that said that it was an elder of the Eastern Band of Cherokees, and he said basically that they used beadwork to teach and to continue traditions even under the watchful eyes of the European missionaries. So they continued to use this iconography, particularly in the ceremonial sashes of the early 1800s, to teach these stories, even as they were converting to Christianity and the kids were going to schools sponsored by missionaries. And I just thought that was amazing that they were using this old pre-contact iconography in the early 1800s. So I used it in the early 20th century, early 21st century to tell the same story, basically. So that's what that's all about. So all of my work has deep meaning. All of the iconography, if it's in my work, there's a story behind it. There's a reason it's there. I'm such a freak. I even count the number of pieces of yarn in a tassel so that it's a multiple of 2 or 4 or 7. Mm-hmm. Because those 4 and 7 are sacred numbers for the Cherokee. And if I do it that way, it comes out right. And if I don't do it that way, it doesn't come out right. I'm never happy with it. So that's what I do. Yeah. And I'm not a numerologist or any of that woo-woo stuff, but if it's in a bag, there's a reason.
Yeah. So there's also you talked earlier about the things that Cherokee people bead, but also you also do all these things. So bandolier bags and ceremonial sashes and moccasins and belts. So I do also want to talk about some of the other things. One of my favorite pieces is the fire carrier's footsteps, which is a pair of beaded moccasins.
Right. That's where there's numbers in those. That was fairly early on that I created those moccasins back a number of years ago. But there are 7 sun circles on every moccasin. There's 3 on each side, and then there's 1 on the back of the spider. And they tell the story of the little water spider. She is my favorite character in Cherokee mythology. She's always a woman, and she's just a little creature. And if you're not familiar with the story, and I encourage you to look up versions of this story, because they're all vary a little bit, but it's a fabulous story of, it came at a time when the animals and the people could all communicate. They all spoke the same language. And they didn't have fire yet. There was no fire. So they were cold and they couldn't cook their food and all the inconveniences that you have without fire. And lightning came and struck tree out on an island in the middle of a lake and started burning. And they knew that that was important, and they knew that they needed to get it. And but they didn't know how they were going to get it. So it started out with all the big birds, all the big showy, the eagle and the crow and all these, the owl, all these big birds, and they will all fly over there and all bring back the fire, you know. And one by one, they looked down and they flew over there, and the flames came up and it charred them black. And their descendants have black feathers to this day. Or the owl went over there and the smoke came up and got in its eyes and it rubbed its eyes. And to this day, it has circles around its eyes. And so finally, the big birds gave up. And the snake said, well, we can go across the water. We'll try it. So one by one, the snakes go over there and they get burned and they get charred, and their descendants carry those scars of their shame to this day. And finally, everybody said, can't be done. They all started to go away. And this little voice said, well, I think I can do it. And they said, they looked around and it was this little water spider. And they laughed at her. I get emotional every time I think of it. They laughed at her. And they said, you can't do that. But she was tenacious. She wasn't strong and she couldn't fly, but she was tenacious. And she said, I think I can. And they said, well, how are you going to bring it back? And she said, well, I'll spin a little bowl using my web, you know, my web material. I'll spin a little bowl and I'll put a little ember in it and I'll bring it back to fire to the people. And they said, whatever. So she went across the water like she does, and she found a little hole in the bottom of the tree, and she went in and she got one little tiny ember, and she put it in the bowl on her back, and she came back across the water. She brought back fire, the most important thing anybody has ever done. She brought back fire, but she was horribly scarred. And for her sacrifice, her descendants to this day carry the marks on their back. Mm-hmm. I mean, if that doesn't get you, nothing will. I mean, come on. That is a story. If I really recommend reading Cherokee mythology. It's just a great study in philosophy and in life. But anyway, the little water spider with the cross on her back, equilateral cross, is just all over the art that came out of the mounds. She was an important character to them, and we see her in modern Cherokee art all the time. So I use her a lot. So that's the fire carrier's footsteps is the name of that piece of art, and that's why. That's what that's all about.
Well, I really think just as you were telling me that story, you know, that I've heard a million times, I just really felt like, you know, for me, and especially to our people, Martha, you're a lot like that water spider, you know, like, I'm not going to get emotional, but, you know, going and finding something and bringing it back to our people, you really did do that. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of your efforts.
Well, I have a couple of calluses on my fingers, but I don't have terrible scars. I didn't do anything that special. I didn't set out to do anything special. I just wanted to get to know my grandmother, you know, and one thing led to another. So, but thank you. That's a very kind thing to say. Wow.
And I think it really does demonstrate, you know, when you look at artwork, it's never just the artwork. And especially, I think, for Cherokee people, I have a hard time disassociating the artwork from the artist, because we pour so much of who we are and our values into what we do. And you can see that in our stories. It's all about perpetuating who we are and making sure that it's there for our children. And you see that in the values when we tell our stories, but also in your artwork. You know, you're not just creating something because you think it's pretty, but everything has a story and everything has a purpose. And I really love that about your artwork.
Well, you're very kind. And I have to tell you something about Indigenous American artists. If I wasn't Cherokee, I could just make pretty things. I like pretty things. I do a couple. I've done some protest pieces, a couple, but I'm just not really all that mad about very much. And so if I protest stuff, it sounds like I'm whining. I've had a very blessed life, but it's your soul, and you put your soul into this work. It tells your story. And the hardest thing to me, the hardest thing I ever did was show my work, because you're going to put your soul up on the wall, and have people come by and make comments about it sometimes. It's just a difficult thing to do, but boy, it's well worth it because most comments are nice. But yeah, it is a part of your heart and a part of your soul. And because we are Indigenous, we can't just be artists. We have to also be historians. We have to study. We have to learn it. We can't just create a piece of art because it's pretty. It has to have meaning. It has to somehow perpetuate this Cherokee river of art. And that's another concept that I've explored and I continue to explore in my work is this, it's a river of art. It doesn't start with us. It comes from upstream and it comes down to us. And then we dip in the river, we learn from the river, we gain from the river, and we contribute to the river, and it just keeps going. And you just could never forget that. You have to be a part of the river. You have to keep the river healthy, and you have to keep it moving along. And so water is life, art is life, and art is water, and the river of life, and the river of art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've talked a lot today about the different pieces that we create traditionally and the pieces that you create. We've got to look at some really beautiful examples, and I think sometimes when we look at art, we don't always think about the process that goes into it. And we talked about this earlier about how the fact that Plains beadwork, which a lot of people associate with Native American beadwork, isn't the same. Can you actually talk to us a little bit about what is the difference? How is the technique how are the techniques different, and how does that look different when the piece is actually completed?
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing you need to understand is that the beadwork of the southeastern Native Americans, Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and a number of smaller tribes that got swallowed up and adopted into that, is very similar to one another. The southeastern tribes had very similar beadwork. The objects they created, the designs they used, of course, the materials, because they traded basically with the same people. But this beadwork of the Southeast is very different from beadwork anywhere else in the country, even from the Northeast, which is also a woodlands area. Oh gosh, where to start? First of all, the materials are different. We traded for cloth, a heavy wool cloth, and we only were able to use, the traders only brought over either the dark navy blue or scarlet stroud cloth, what they call stroud cloth, which is a very heavy, rich, delicious, well, it's not delicious, but it's delightful to work with, wool cloth. And it was made in Stroud, England. Copious amounts of it were made for trade with Native Americans and for military uniforms. And so it became known as Stroud because it came from Stroud, England. And that is what we use more than leather, except for moccasins. More than leather, we use this Stroud cloth as the base of our beadwork. We use the designs that we use require different techniques. For example, oftentimes you see in Plains beadwork what they call a lazy stitch, which is rows of beads, and then the design is made by changing the colors of the beads within the row. So you'll have a line, of white that goes into navy blue, for example, and then up the rows it changes. But because we use the curvilinear designs that were used by our ancestors on the pottery and the stone carvings and the shell carvings and copper incising that we found in the mounds, because we use those same kind of designs, they're curvilinear. In other words, they're made with curving lines. Well, you can't do curving lines and do lazy stitch. So the technique that we use most commonly is called two needle applique. It's similar to couching in fashion beadwork, but it's done differently. But it's basically you use two needles, and one needle has the beads threaded on it, and the other needle just goes up and down, taking this line of beads around the circle or the spiral or whatever. But because we use curvilinear designs, that requires a different technique. We also trim it in silk ribbon. We loved the silk ribbon, and so we use, nowadays, those of us who do authentic materials. You have to use 100% silk ribbon, which is not easy to find. And I try to use, to the extent possible in the 21st century, authentic materials to about roughly 1800. And so for the Stroud cloth, I have a supplier who gets it from undyed from England, and then he dyes it either navy blue or scarlet, and I order it from him. And then for the ribbon, I have to get from a Revolutionary War reenactor supply house, because you can't go down to the hobby shop to get silk ribbon, and it's extremely expensive. For the wool, for the tassels, I use a Peruvian wool that produces a tassel that is just exactly like and proportionately fit for the objects, so that they look like the old objects did. So, it makes them, and I only use glass beads, and only glass beads made in Europe. I wish I could use Japanese beads because they're so much easier to use, but I can't because they're not authentic. Mm-hmm. And so those are the materials that I use, and the beaders that I have taught who use authentic materials, that's what they use. And so it makes the objects even more precious, because the supplies are just kind of hard to come by, especially during the pandemic. But it also makes them look more like the old ones did, which is important to those of us who like to try to be authentic.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I really want to emphasize is the time commitment, because beading is not something like, oh, I'm going to have a weekend project, and at the end I'm going to have a finished thing. So can you talk to us a little bit about, I know probably one of your biggest time commitment is the bandolier bag, but can you also talk to us about, what the time commitment looks for that, and also how long it takes you to do the other items that you create?
Well, a bandolier bag, I keep track of my hours, particularly on bandolier bags, because those are the pieces. If I enter a contest, I generally enter a bandolier bag because they're just the most impressive, frankly. And if I use it to enter a contest, I always fully bead the flap, because fully beaded to do that now, to win a contest nowadays, you have to cover large areas with tiny beads, solid covered. Well, the only way I can do that and be authentic in Southeastern beadwork is to fully bead a flap. So a bandolier bag with a fully beaded flap takes about 350 hours to complete. If I don't bead the flap, I can do it in about 300, sometimes a little less, depending on the design. And it depends on the design itself. Some designs bead quickly. They just they flow smoothly and quickly. Other designs don't. And of course, the size of the bead makes an amazing amount of difference. It's like the difference between painting a wall with a roller and painting a wall with a 1-inch brush. You use a tiny bead, takes longer to make the picture than big fat beads do. So, the more skilled you become, the smaller beads you use, and because you can make much more beautiful designs, but it takes longer to do. So bandolier bag is about 350 hours. And then it goes down from there. A sash takes probably 200 hours, 250, something like that, depending on how elaborate they are. And then a purse, actually purses I don't keep track of. I can make a purse in about 3 weeks. The amount of time I bead, which is never more than about 4. I'm too old to sit for more than 4 hours at a time. But the purse takes about 3 weeks to make. Moccasins, 4 to 5 weeks probably, depending on how elaborate. But the bandolier bags take 3 or 4 months for me, because I just can't put in more hours than that.
Yeah.
In any given day.
Yeah. So it's definitely a labor of love.
Yeah. It's labor intensive, to say the least. It's I suppose you could make a living if you were young and you could bead for many hours and your eyes could take it, your hands and your back could take it. But I don't know anybody who does it to completely support themselves. Southeastern beaders, anyway.
Yeah.
Everybody that I know does it, and they also have a full-time job, or they have mom and they homeschool or whatever. But it's labor intensive, to say the least. Yes. Yeah. To do good beadwork, I mean, you can't rush good beadwork. You can do bad beadwork pretty quickly, but if it's going to be good, you have to take the time.
Yeah. And I do want to let all of our viewers know that we hope that you really enjoyed this live, but also if you are interested at all in learning about any of the things that Martha does have a website. It's Berry, Berry, last name's Berry, so berrybeadwork.com. So you can go on her website and you can see pieces that she's made. But how I stumbled across you, Martha, is I actually was looking up information, instructions, and tutorials, and I found one of your patterns. So can you talk to us a little bit about the patterns that you offer on your website?
I can, and I'm going to brag on you a little bit. First time I ever met Danielle, she walked into my classroom, supposedly a class for beginners, in 2007, I think it was. And she walked in wearing a bandolier bag she had made herself. And I'm going, whoa. And she's just a very skilled gal in many, many ways. But
Thank you.
but yeah, so you talk about the patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sell 5 different patterns on my website, and you can just buy them. Just click on it and buy them right there. The transaction's handled through PayPal. And I sell patterns for bandolier bags, ceremonial sashes, moccasins, 3 different kinds of moccasins in one pattern, belts and purses. And there's 2 different kinds of purses in one pattern. And excuse me, each pattern contains illustrated instructions for the Southeastern techniques that you need to have to create that particular piece. For example, the bandolier bags teach you how to make tassels and how to do 2-needle applique and 2-bead flat stitch and 2-bead line stitch, and all these techniques required for that piece. And if different techniques are required for different pieces, they're in that piece's pattern. And so yeah, you can go online and order those, and I certainly appreciate it. But it's just an opportunity because I live far away. I live in Texas. I live in Dallas. Don't tell anybody, but I live in Texas, and so to teach, I've taught 1 class in Texas and lectured 3 times, but everywhere else requires overnight travel or long travel and an overnight stay. And so it's just not something you can do every day. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to have these patterns has been a great opportunity to teach, which has always been what I'm about, is to teach it. And there's no better way to appreciate an art form than to try to do it. So even if you don't want to become a beader, I recommend at least trying to do a piece. You might want to start with like a purse. That's usually something I start my beginning students with, because it's a little easier. It doesn't take as long, and then work your way up to a bandolier bag.
Yeah, and so like Martha said, I did take one of her classes. I actually started with one of her patterns. I purchased the bandolier bag pattern, and it was so easy to follow. There are diagrams, and I was able to make first before I got to the class. So I just think it's really important, and really want to applaud you for making that accessible, for us to learn these things. So thank you for doing that.
Well, you are welcome, and that's like I said, I'm all about making sure that no longer will anybody ever be able to say Cherokees can't recognize their own grandmother's beadwork if you lay it out in front of them. I want them to know what it looks like, and because most of our artifacts are not where the Cherokees are. Mm-hmm. Most of the Cherokees are still in Oklahoma, and there are very few Cherokee beaded artifacts there, and because they were collected before we got to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And so that's the purpose of the patterns, is easy access to this knowledge for somebody who doesn't, live where I do.
Yeah. And so again, just that, thank you for offering that class. And for me, it was a really empowering moment, because I got to take what you taught me and I actually get to use it in the job that I do today. So I don't know if our viewers have seen, but the Gilcrease Museum has maker moments where we want to encourage you guys to create your own artwork. And actually, earlier this week, I was able to do a maker moment where I taught the basics of two needle applique. So I love that it embodies our culture. As you know, like, I got to learn from you, and then I get to show other people, and I can't wait to hear later on down the line someone say, you know, like, I watched this video and then I taught someone else. So I just love that.
Jumping in that river of art with the rest of us. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I do have a few more questions before we get off. I would really love to know, and I think this is kind of like asking someone, you know, who their favorite child is if they have more than one child.
I do not have a favorite child. Let me say that.
Do you have a favorite piece that you created?
Well, I can tell you what my least favorite always is. My least favorite is the last one I did. I hate my work. I hate my work. I always hate my work. I can't even begin to like it for about 6 months. And then I'll go back and look at photos and I think, you know, that's really not so bad. That's not so bad. It's growing on me. But they never turn out as good as I want them to. I always learn from them and do better next time. But generally, the favorite one is the next one. I mean, I guess that defines me as an optimistic person. Is I just always think, oh, this is going to be so great. Oh, this is such a great idea. And the whole process of being inspired by a quotation or a photograph or an experience, and just having that pow, 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 those ideas just popping into your head, you know, the whole creative part of it is just so rewarding. And then I love to sit and bead, just to sit. It's so relaxing. We have the TV on. My husband's over there on the computer. I'm just playing with little round pieces of glass. And that's very soothing. And so the next piece is generally always my favorite. I think if I look back through that one that you showed, the Hidden in Plain Sight, it's prominent on my Facebook page, and it's probably my favorite. It was one of the very first I did with a fully beaded flap, which was a very challenging one to do, by the way. Of all the fully beaded flaps I've done, it was the hardest one. But because it hides a story, and it just I think that's probably. I like the colors in it. They turned out. But it was another one I couldn't stand to look at for at least 6 months after I made it.
Well, I do. We've talked in little segments how important it is to pass things on, and how that's an intrinsic value to Cherokee people. And I think it just really inspires me to look at you and your family. I'm always inspired because you are so open and you teach lots of people and you have these classes. But I also am very inspired to see, you know, your actual family. And would you mind sharing us a little bit about your two daughters and how they are also carrying on our traditions?
Well, you will have to stop me, because if you ask me to talk about my babies, I won't stop. Oh God, we are so blessed. We have two beautiful daughters, and I must say too, here talking about family, I must formally thank my husband. He is my executive vice president of lugging and toting. He's my IT director. He is my courage, and I couldn't do any of this without him. But we have produced, the two of us, these two wonderful daughters. One is the eldest is Christina, and she is carrying on Cherokee tradition through research and writing and history and genealogy. And she operates the All Things Cherokee website. It's just allthingscheroke.com, no spaces. And it is a place to go to see Cherokee art and Cherokee history, and to if you have questions about your Cherokee genealogy. And she's got on there some places that are important sites, like travel sites that have Cherokee history, important historic places. And she does many other things in life. She's an incredible writer. She is an incredible manager where she works. She's just a multi-talented woman, married to a great guy. But All Things Cherokee is worth a visit. And then Karen, our youngest daughter, she is also has a great husband, and they have a great life together. And she has a great job. She is a GUI engineer. I had to look that up. But anyway, she's a senior GUI engineer. And but she also creates Cherokee art. In fact, she and I are partners that way. We partner in a booth at Cherokee Art Market, and she started out carving gourds, which are some of the ugliest things on earth. If you've ever seen a raw gourd, they're not beautiful. And she creates these incredibly beautiful pieces of art, delicate, intricate, and that carry Cherokee mythology and Cherokee stories with them. And then she began doing Cherokee finger weaving. And she takes wool, the same wool that I use is Peruvian wool, and a pile of beads, and makes cloth with the design done in beads with her fingers. She doesn't use a loom. It's called finger weaving because she just takes yarn and beads and she makes cloth with her fingers and creates these incredibly beautiful designs. And the more and more elaborate, she's getting better and better and better at it. And boy, this last one that she created is an image from the mounds, which is the woodpecker from the mounds, which represents the plain, just the foot soldiers, not the generals, but just the foot soldiers. And she created that in finger weaving, and it's just amazing to see. So, and she has, I can't remember her web address now. You guys probably have it there. But anyway, she's Karen Berry, Cherokee finger weaver. You look it up, and she has an amazing website. So yeah, the pleasure that I derive from seeing what my girls do for Cherokee history and Cherokee cultural preservation is just indescribable. I mean, if beadwork was a contribution, they're way more. They're way more.
Yeah. So if you guys do want to check out her daughter's websites, so if you want to check out more about history, art, and genealogy, it's allthingscherokee.com. And if you want to check out some of Karen's finger weaving artwork, which I super nerd out over, I love her finger weaving, it is karenberrycherokee.com as well. So if you guys have any questions, please comment. We've had a couple questions throughout the live that naturally we've just kind of answered, Martha. But we did have one more question that I wanted to ask you. Someone asked where they get shroud cloth, and we talked about that. But they were also wondering, are there particular colors of ribbon that you use?
Well, I'll pick out a color for each piece that I usually color from the beads. I mean, if I've got like an accent color on the beads, I'll pick out that color to use for the ribbon. For example, if you have like a peacock blue or bead that is kind of an accent, not the main color, I'll use that in the ribbon or also in the tassels. So it gives you kind of frame the piece with this line of color. I have learned the hard way that dark colors are better because the two things I do that are modern is I have electric lights. I use electric lights to bead, and I steam press a piece when it's finished. And you have to be very careful with light colored ribbon. I tend to use a darker color because I actually scorched the ribbon on this sash that I have finished. I spent many, many, many hours on it, and I scorched the ribbon. So I ripped that off and changed the ribbon color to black, and because I couldn't get any darker than that. And so that was a hard learned lesson. But in terms of tradition, I think they use whatever they could get a hold of. If they could get a hold of a bead color, they could get a hold of a ribbon color, they used it. And they didn't care that they wore stripes with plaids, that they wore different kinds of colors with different kinds of objects. And they had tassels and fringe on their bandolier bags, on their sashes, on their knee bands, and they were flashy. It was flat. When they dressed up, it was flashy. And so I think that if you can get a bead color that was authentic to the, as long as it's European and it's not metallic or neon. Well, you can use metallic beads, but like metallic line, like what they call silver lined beads. I have used those for a specific reason on a specific pieces of beadwork where I'm talking about fire and everything is about bold, bright light. I did use that. But as a rule, I don't use metallic line or silver line beads because they weren't period authentic. You can use like a gold metallic bead and that kind of thing. But as far as the ribbon colors, if it was authentic to the time period of roughly the American Revolution, there's no reason not to use it because we know that they did.
Okay. We also had another viewer ask when they're purchasing wool, is there a specific weight of wool that they need to purchase?
Heavy.
Heavy as you can get.
Heavy. And I have to tell you, Strata cloth used to be easy to come by. And I used to get my beads and my Strata cloth at the same place and the wax and all that stuff in the same place. I had to get the ribbon in a different place. Well, then Strata became hard to come by, and that manufacturer didn't even, or that supplier didn't even carry it. They carry it again, but it is not the same. It is very, very thin. You can even hold it up to a window and actually see light through it. And you can use that. And you can use a heavy wool broadcloth, but it has to be heavy because beads are heavy. And after, 200-300 years, when some hungry grad student is pawing through the drawers of some museum somewhere, I want them to be able to actually still see my work. Mm-hmm. And so to really be authentic, it needs to be a really heavy strap. And if you are a beader and you are doing elevated levels of work, like you've got some experience, and you think you want to invest in really good Strata cloth, let me know and I will let you know. You can email me from my website, and I will give you the name of the fella, a guy, just a fella, who gets undyed wool from England, and then he dyes it and ships it to you, and I will give you that name. But I don't want to just inundate him with people who are not serious beaters and it's not cheap. It's about $50 a yard. It's not cheap stuff. You can't. Anyway, but
So I just want to encourage everyone, please check out all of the websites we have shared today. berrybeadwork.com to look at Martha's art. You can also check out Cherokee history, art, and genealogy on Christina's website, All Things Cherokee. And you can also look at Karen Berry Cherokee to look at finger weaving. Also, please look at our maker moment. We want to encourage you guys to become beaders. That is how this carries on. This isn't something we want to be stingy with. It's not something that only we do, but we want there to be more beaders in the world. And so please take a moment to look at our maker moment. It'll explain the supplies that you need, and it's a video you can watch at your own pace and see how to do that. It is kind of like a little taste in the technique. If you, as our viewers, are interested in maybe having like a full-fledged workshop where start to finish you learn how to make a small purse, please let us know in the comments. Message us, say, I want a Cherokee Beadwork workshop, and we will try and make that happen. But Martha, I just want to thank you so much today for coming on this Facebook Live. Thank you not only for sharing with us today your expertise, but thank you for really reviving this artwork, and thank you for really, in every sense of the word, being a national treasure for us.
Oh my gosh, you are so welcome, and I am so honored. And I want to thank Gilcrease. I want to thank you. I want to thank Kenneth and Lauren and everybody down there. You guys do such an amazing job, and it's my honor to be here. But it's so good for beadwork, and I really thank you for that, because more people know about it today and understand a little more today than did this morning when they woke up. So that's what it's all about. Thank you. And thank you for the questions that came in too. Whoever asked the questions, thank you.
So thank you guys so much for joining us on this Facebook Live. Thank you to Martha. We hope that you enjoyed this live and that you learned more about Cherokee Beadwork. We want to invite you to follow us on our Maker Moments, also to follow us on social media, and we look forward to engaging with you guys in the future.